Welcome to Proto-Future, a podcast about riding Amtrak, recorded while riding Amtrak. This is Proto-Future Episode 13, How to Ride Amtrak, Part 1, the entire timetable. In this episode, I'll take you through the entire Amtrak timetable, describing every single train from 1 to 2290. Ever since the days of BGT, I had an idea to do an episode on how to ride Amtrak. Now that I find myself fleeing across the country by train as a genderqueer refugee of a fascist state, I am gaining a ton of first-hand knowledge, literally right this second. So not only am I trying to single-handedly derive modern passenger train modeling as its own genre from first principles, I thought I might also take this opportunity to give you 2 episodes about how to ride Amtrak, recorded directly while on board the Amtrak Sunset Limited, train number 1. I've touched on my Amtrakking before in the prologue series. If you've missed those, they're all helpfully linked in order on the main page of the website. But the big trip that really made me into an expert in the field of Amtrakology was the summer before grad school, over 8 years ago. After moving all of my stuff from Long Island, just outside of New York City, to my new home in State College, Pennsylvania, I hopped on the Pennsylvanian to Pittsburgh, took the Capital Limited to Chicago, the Empire Builder to Portland, and Amtrak Cascades to Seattle, where I spent the summer with my family, then grabbed the Coast Starlight to Sacramento, the California Zephyr to Chicago, the Cap to Pittsburgh, and the Pennsylvanian to Altoona. All told, 9 days, 7 nights, and just short of 11,000 kilometers on the rails. In the intervening years, I've upped my travels to 71 individual segments on 22 routes, and just about 40,000 kilometers by train only in the US. Sure, Amtrak barely holds a candle to its peers among other developed countries, but you might be surprised to know that there are actually some islands of passability in a few places throughout the country, and several of them are not named nor touching the Northeast Corridor. Further still, and this is a true fact which is painful to many of its detractors, Amtrak is the best passenger rail provider in the Western Hemisphere, offering the most routes, stations, and having the highest ridership. It was almost a meme for a while that disgruntled Americans would up and move to Canada, but whereas VIA once had multiple daily transcontinental routes that it has let winnow to a single train twice a week between Toronto and Vancouver, uses vintage equipment from the 1950s, takes 4.5 days end-to-end, and is effectively a land cruise ship, Amtrak, on the other hand, has daily departures on 4 overnight transcontinental routes, going west out of Chicago to Seattle and Portland, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Antonio, and the latter having an every other day connection to Los Angeles. Additionally, VIA's equipment is so old and uncrashworthy that a court recently ruled it had to run extra unoccupied cars on the rear of its trains as crumple zones. So between that and the practical absence of reliable intercity rail in South America, and El Tren de Maya's tourist focus and ecological genocide, but admittedly welcome focus on modern infrastructure and non-car brain transport, Amtrak is nonetheless actually the best rail transport operator in North and South America. But, all that being said, despite its post-COVID gangbusters growth, only an enlightened 8.5% of Americans actually rode the train last year. Thus, with so few of us actually having tried this magic carpet on the rails, I think it's time for an instructive how-to on how to take a trip by Amtrak. While it would be ideal to already have a Euro-style network blanketing the whole country with half-hourly frequencies and a high-speed rail between all possible city pairs, and while we should still pester all of our elected officials for this at every opportunity, saying that their top priority should always be ending US aid to Israel, DC statehood, nationwide high-speed, higher-speed, conventional-speed intercity rail, and a Stadtbahn, light rail, and streetcar in every single city, with U-Bahns and the big ones, all completely replacing Stroads and highways. In the meantime, if you like trains and want to have a retirement on a planet that's not Arrakis, you should go out of your way to ride the trains that we already have. That begs the question, how do you do that? I'll go into specifics of getting tickets and the onboard experience in a later episode, but this episode will first start with some background. Headquartered at 1 Massachusetts Avenue and operating for over 50 years since May 1st, 1971, the National Passenger Rail Corporation, or Amtrak, is a quasi-private corporation which runs over 300 trains a day to over 500 stations in 46 of the lower 48 states. With Brightline now operating between Orlando and Miami, and the Alaska Railroad between Anchorage and Fairbanks, and a few other municipal transit agencies which run routes long and frequently enough to effectively be intercity trains, such as the Front Runner between Ogden, Salt Lake, and Provo, the Rail Runner between Albuquerque and Santa Fe, and the MBTA between, for example, Boston and Worcester, Amtrak is far from the sole provider of intercity rail services in the country, but it is absolutely the dominant one. Look around on Google Maps for other rail lines in your area if you're curious, but feel safe in starting on Amtrak's website for your longer distance travel needs. There are 3 general types of Amtrak routes: the Northeast Corridor, state-supported corridors, and long-distance trains. The Northeast Corridor is what we canonically think of as the most popular Amtrak route, and this makes sense because the density and proximity of the cities in the Northeast megalopolis make it such that arriving city center to city center is usually cost-competitive with flying due to the time penalty incurred by traveling to a faraway airport, checking in, going through security, and boarding the plane. This is a time penalty palpable for a trip 1,000 miles or more, or over an ocean, but not one under 1,000. As such, within the Northeast Corridor cities, Amtrak has over 50% travel share. Furthermore, and interestingly, because it's so busy and has such high demand, somewhere around 1/3 of each ticket's cost is pure profit that goes to subsidize the less profitable trains elsewhere on the network. Not that trains should be profitable. #privatize roads and close the ones that lose money. A more recent phenomenon that has risen significantly in importance since the 1990s is Amtrak's state-supported routes. Though there were always a few routes run by Amtrak but paid for by this state or that, the more recent push for viable alternatives to driving, and the admission that trains shouldn't have to pay for themselves so long as highways don't either, led to a proliferation of various distal networks supported mostly by blue states, allowing surprisingly robust train travel even outside the Northeast Corridor, often with multiple departures daily, and often again paired with long-distance trains to get bonus round trips for even more travel options. Well, by North American standards. The state-supported corridors can be thought of as regional trains, train travel that fits ideally where train travel should, in the category of travel that is, quote, too short to fly, too long to long-distance bicycle. Even if a trip could be driven or taken by intercity bus, wouldn't you rather get up, walk about, have a snack, and see some good scenery, and help stave off the impending ecosystem collapse, as the oldest diesel train is still better for the environment than the newest electric car? The final category of Amtrak routes are the contested long-distance trains. These are usually once daily departures with 1 or 2 overnights, although a few routes are thrice weekly, which means that the westbound comes on Monday, the eastbound on Tuesday, westbound on Wednesday, and so on and so forth, with a single day off on Saturday. The long-distance trains are extremely unique because the sheer magnitude of a 20 to 50-hour contiguous journey requires incredible and fascinating logistics. These are gorgeous, usually multi-decked trains with lounge cars going through fantastic scenery that everybody thinks of when they hear Amtrak. In many cases, their departure times and schedules are limited not by infrastructure, but by needing to hit most major cities along their route during the daytime. Unfortunately, this is not perfect, as Spokane, Omaha, Little Rock, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Pittsburgh all seem perpetually shafted, though Ohio, mostly by its own state, let's put John Kasich on the dais right next to Scott Walker as evil Republican governor responsible for starting the ruin of America. But, other than those 4 examples, most major cities are hit at least once during the daytime when you could reasonably be awake enough to get on board a train. Even if Amtrak doesn't go directly to your city, it's extremely likely that there's an Amtrak station close by, as is the case with Madison, Des Moines, or Phoenix. Hell, if you live in any of these places, it's damn near certifiable that you already have a car, so what's a short drive of 30 to 45 minutes? I still think that a station driven to is a station wasted, but, well, it's what we've got, and better to take the train than to not. Now, an interesting note on the long-distance trains is that they're often lampooned for being the butt end of technology, government-subsidized boomer land cruises, because who in their right mind would take a 48-hour train from Chicago to the West Coast when you could fly there in 5 hours? Well, me. Hi, I'm doing that right now. And to be sure, that's fair. Most people taking it end-to-end are doing it more for the experience than anything else. But if you actually ride a long-distance train, you realize the beauty of train technology. Anybody can get on or off anywhere along the entire route so long as there's a station there. A long-distance train doesn't exist to serve the weirdo who travels from Chicago to San Francisco. It exists to serve the people who are traveling from Chicago to Galesburg, from Galesburg to St. Louis, from St. Louis to Omaha, from Omaha to Denver, from Denver to Grand Junction, from Grand Junction to Salt Lake, from Salt Lake to Reno, Reno, and then from Reno to San Francisco, as well as every single other remote and isolated small town along the way. Just taking the train will reveal this churn of both coach cars and sleepers as different destinations are paired by different riders, making the long-distance routes absolutely vital transportation arteries. As such, a recent study showed that every dollar invested in a long-distance train network by the government results in a 9-fold return on investment to the communities it serves, in the form of better access to major hospitals for healthcare, schools for career development, and cities for tourism, both from and to the small town in question. And not to mention, because of the idiotic idea that trains need to be self-sustaining, Amtrak has over 95% fare box recovery, meaning that only 5% of its operational budget comes from the federal government. So most of the money lost on the Red State long-distance network comes from the operating surpluses generated on the Northeast corridor. Rather than spending that money where it's generated, and where the demand clearly is, to straighten the route and eliminate bridges in Connecticut, instead we're squandering the good money on moving the idiots who perpetually vote against the funding of better trains. Yet another way in which conservative rural small-town America is a drag on the world, a net negative for its contributions. Sigh. Anyway, back to how to trains. In my experience, especially for people who have never taken Amtrak before, the biggest limitation is just simply not knowing that the train is there. In an effort to ameliorate this problem, but since I can't really describe a map in audio, I thought it would be creative and educational to walk through every single Amtrak route by train number, discuss a bit about each, whither they go and how they relate to each other, all the way from train number 1 to train number 2290. If you're a modeler, pay attention, as this is a direct lesson on the prototype which will influence how you model passenger trains. If you're an activist, listen in for the history of how we got to where we are and for ideas on what to push for next. If you're a rail fan, I genuinely enjoyed putting this together because I can't say I know of as comprehensive a list anywhere that describes the whole shebang. And for everyone listening, listen up for wherever you live and start planning your next trip. Or, if you don't hear your city or town, blame your car-brained grandparents and start writing your legislators immediately. For those interested, odd train numbers are typically westbound and southbound, whereas even train numbers are northbound and eastbound. This comes from historical convention inasmuch as most major originating railroad hotbeds in the country were, as you may have interpolated from previous episodes, in the northeast. So the first outbound train of the day, slot number 1 in the schedule, was away from this, being therefore either westbound or southbound, and its logical counterpart, train number 2, must therefore be inbound to the east and north. It's not universal, and modern freight railroads instead prefer alphanumeric identifiers denoting origin-destination pairs, but it's an interesting convention for passenger trains. Additionally, train numbers are not necessarily sequential, some trains having been lost to time and others being grouped by service category. So immediately bucking this trend by not originating in the Northeast are trains number 1 and 2, the Sunset Limited, the very train I am on board right now. This is one of only 2 Amtrak routes to share the dreaded thrice-weekly schedule, and one with a very sad story to boot. It originally ran coast to coast over 3 nights, but the track between Jacksonville and New Orleans was damaged by Hurricane Katrina in 2004, and CSX has been iron-gripped in denying Amtrak slots again until very recently. If running passenger trains hurts their business, suck it up. If running passenger trains imperils their business's future, maybe we'll pay them for their troubles. If that doesn't work, oops, it's time to nationalize. Anyway, in its current form, the Sunset Limited runs every other day from New Orleans to Houston, San Antonio, El Paso, Tucson, Maricopa just outside of Phoenix, Yuma, Palm Springs, and Los Angeles. There are currently plans underway to both extend it again to Mobile, Pensacola, Jacksonville, and potentially Miami, and a portion of this route was very recently revived as the Mardi Gras from NOLA to Mobile. If the full route to Jacksonville ever happens again, it will once again be the only route offering non-stop coast-to-coast service, as well as plugging a vital link in transfers to or from the southeast. Additional plans are in the mix to reroute it through downtown Phoenix proper. Moving north, trains 3 and 4 are the Southwest Chief. A similar desert train, this time daily, and our first radiating from the Chicago hub, the Chief is named for the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe's famous Super Chief passenger train, actually one of the original trains to initiate the use of bi-level passenger cars, off of which the Amtrak Superliner passenger cars were later patterned. In fact, the Santa Fe was so prideful of its passenger heritage that it didn't let Amtrak use the Chief name until nearly 15 years after Amtrak had been up and running, when it finally deemed that the service quality was deserving of the brand. The Southwest Chief runs from Chicago to Kansas City, Topeka, Dodge City, Albuquerque, Flagstaff, Barstow, and Los Angeles. The Chief is known for running through some very remote territory in western Kansas, southeastern Colorado, and northern New Mexico, primarily along Raton Pass, a scenic rail alignment on which the Chief is the only train to run due to host railroad mergers and consolidations. In 2010, BNSF tried to make Amtrak pay all the maintenance costs, and in 2018, Amtrak President Richard Anderson tried to close down the line with a midnight bustitution rather than upgrade the line with positive train control, making the Southwest Chief momentarily the center of a national conversation on the place of long-distance passenger trains in America. Thankfully, the conversation ended well, and the Chief is still running non-stop. Moving north again, and possibly the most scenic and most storied long-distance route, are trains number 5 and 6, the California Zephyr. This is one of 3 trains to have not immediately joined Amtrak upon its formation in 1971, because the host railroads thought that it could still be profitable, the other 2 being the Auto Train and the Crescent, but it soon folded and became part of the Amtrak family in 1983. The Zephyr is known for its incredible scenery, crossing not only the storied Rocky Mountains, Front Range, and Glenwood Canyon that inspired the existence of dome cars, but also the Sierra Nevadas and Donner Summit, as well as respectable stark desert scenery of its own through Nevada and Utah. Excluding the combined Texas Eagle Sunset Limited, the California Zephyr is the longest uninterrupted Amtrak route. Of all the long-distance trains, this understandably rides at the top of many people's bucket lists and is a worthy place to start if you've never ridden a train overnight before. The Zephyr runs daily from Chicago to near Des Moines, through Omaha, Lincoln, Denver, Glenwood Springs, Grand Junction, Salt Lake, Reno, Sacramento, and ends in Oakland just across the bay from San Francisco. Our first uniquely numbered trains are 7, 8, 27, and 28, the Empire Builder. The highest ridership of the western long-distance trains, and having scenery almost as dramatic as the Zephyr, the Builder has one of the northernmost train routes, skirting within just a few miles of Canada. Departing Chicago, it runs north to Glenview, then non-stop through a state which doesn't exist until Winona, Minnesota, then stopping at the Twin Cities, Fargo, and going through a whole lot of nothing with so-called major towns being Minot, North Dakota, and Havre, Montana. In western Montana, it winds through Glacier National Park and some simply stunning scenery, calling at the famed Isaac Walton Inn and Whitefish, Montana. Overnight, it stops in Spokane, and we get the explanation for the 4 train numbers. Trains 7 and 8 are the main train segment, which continues through Leavenworth and the Cascades to Seattle, but the back third of the train is cut off and proceeds as trains 27 and 28 down the Columbia River through Pasco to Portland, the returning trips rejoining in Spokane the next day. Sometimes there's even a third number pairing. As the Twin Cities to Chicago travel is definitely the busiest segment of the route, an extra coach car or few was occasionally added to the train to deal with higher demand, but rather than go empty the entire rest of the route, it was uncoupled at St. Paul Union Depot and left for the next day's Builder to use on the return to Chicago. This single car, affectionately known as the Mini Builder, was designated 807 and 808 on the timetable. 1 train, 6 timetable numbers. When the Empire Builder was run by the Great Northern, it was the flagship train of a railroad that respected passenger service long after other railroads had stopped caring. This culture somehow passed on to Amtrak. While the Zephyr is known for its scenery, in many ways the Builder is considered Amtrak's flagship of the long-distance trains, getting the most care and attention from its crew, the best equipment, and latest upgrades, being the first route to use ALC-42 chargers, and even beating Acela for a few years in on-time performance. Moving away from the east-west long-distance routes and making our first non-contiguous train number jump, trains 11 and 14 are the Coast Starlight. Another incredibly scenic train, and for a while another de facto flagship, the Starlight suffered a series of setbacks from the mortal enemy of passenger trains, Union Pacific, having for a period an on-time performance rating as low as 2%, earning it one of the dreaded railfan nicknames, the Coast Starlight, up there with the Late for Sure Limited and the Crapital Limited, though internet forums inform me that conductors sometimes referred to it as the Coast Bar Fight. Unlike other long-distance trains, though, the Starlight was notable for 2 distinct features. First, for a while, it had a separate lounge car for sleeping car passengers, the Pacific Parlor Cars, which actually came from the original Santa Fe Super Chief bi-level train sets, offering a bar, arcade, and a movie lounge, but these were unfortunately retired in the late 20-teens as Amtrak's last and longest-living heritage equipment. Thankfully, most of these have survived into preservation. The other notable feature of the Starlight is that it is shorter than the other Transcons, only about a day and a half, but non-stop scenery. Whereas with the others, you have to suffer through some dullardry through the plains in order to get to the good stuff, the Starlight rides the Pacific Coast Mountains from bottom to top, going from Seattle to Portland, Eugene, Klamath Falls, Oakland, San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, and Los Angeles. The biomes alternate between northwestern rainforest, Shasta Mountain Plateau, NorCal Inland Sea, and Pacific Coastal, truly giving the Zephyr a run for its money, and another worthy entrant for anyone's first long-distance train. For the first time leaving the West, trains number 19 and 20 are the Crescent. So named for its destination, the Crescent City, NOLA, the shrinkingest, sinkingest city in the country, the Rust Belt in the Sun Belt, and the, quote, only large city left in America where birth counts for so much. The Crescent is another post-Amtrak holdover that was only turned over from the Southern Railway in 1979. Since it starts in New York and runs along the Northeast Corridor, it's worth noting that a lot of these eastern long-distance trains technically operate on the corridor as expresses, only calling at major stations. However, unlike a lot of railroad operations in Europe, where you can hop on or off any train calling it any city pair, I believe that the long-distance trains traveling on the NEC only take passengers beyond the NEC, in part because on-time performance is so unreliable once off Amtrak-controlled tracks, and because we live in a late-stage capitalism hellscape rather than a democratic socialist utopia, like every other developed country in Europe. Anyway, the Crescent goes New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, Charlotte, Greenville, Atlanta, Birmingham, and New Orleans, and be warned, has some pretty notable on-time performance issues. Back in the West, trains 21, 22, 421, and 422 are the Texas Eagle. This is another unique route, and possibly the only one offering true connecting service in the current Amtrak system. It runs daily from Chicago to San Antonio via Bloomington Normal, St. Louis, Little Rock, Galesburg, Fort Worth, and Austin. However, thrice weekly, when the Sunset Limited goes through San Antonio, a coach and a sleeper car are set out at the station for an elongated, unpowered layover to then be picked up by the Sunset Limited and carried all the way through to Los Angeles. The set-out cars are designated 421, oh, that's the one I took, and 422, and their combined journey is 4,390 kilometers, the longest train route in the US and the second longest in North America behind the Canadian. Similarly to the Builder, an extra coach is occasionally taken from Chicago to only St. Louis for capacity, designated 321 and 322. So, I guess by extrapolation, the Mini Eagle. The four newest numbers on the list are 23 to 26, the Mardi Gras. As aforementioned, the Sunset Limited used to run non-stop from Los Angeles all the way to at least Jacksonville, Florida, offering not only coast-to-coast service, but also service along the Gulf Coast. The return of this service had many ups and downs, having been worked on since at least 2017, finally inaugurated only on August 18, 2025, returning service from Mobile to New Orleans for the first time in 20 years. Astonishingly, the service began right out of the gate as twice daily, already putting it a leg up on many other state-supported routes. Its incredible success will likely soon be followed by an extension to Baton Rouge and possibly Lafayette. Going back east, trains 29 and 30 were the Capital Limited. Historically, one of the premier U.S. passenger trains for linking two major destinations, the Cap and its partner, the Lakeshore Limited, currently act as the closest the U.S. has to a proper night train. Get on board in D.C. in the late afternoon, enjoy some mountain views over dinner, sleep your way through Ohio, and you're in Chicago by 9, barring CSX being mean around Toledo. The eastbound schedule is a little less convenient, but still have an early dinner in Chicago and you're in DC in time for lunch. Given the survivability of the schedule, the Cap somewhat functioned as an East Coast flagship, often getting special attention and toiletry kits because it runs right in Amtrak HQ's backyard, and to entice the odd politician who tries it to stick with it and come back again, although it suffered for quite a while along with other Eastern long-distance trains as being restricted to prefabricated airline meals, the so-called and quite dreaded flexible dining menu. Unfortunately, Pittsburgh barely got any passable service for the odd scheduling, with trains coming around midnight and 0600, and Cleveland and Sandusky are completely shafted. Often, in the past, most long-distance routes would see multiple staggered departures throughout the day, such that if the timing of one train wasn't convenient for you now, you could get another one in 3 to 6 hours, much like a plane. But nowadays, if your state, like Ohio, doesn't spring for Amtrak funding, well, suck it up, Buttercup. I wonder why Ohio hasn't seen any population growth above the US average since 1997. However, I regret to inform you that the Capital Limited is dead. Long live trains 40 and 41, the Floridian. Starting in November 2024, construction on the Hudson River tunnels between Moynihan Station in New York City and the southern half of the Northeast Corridor severely impacted available train slots, and further still, the last Superliner coach was built almost 30 years ago in 1996, making their numbers quite constrained. In fact, it should actually be noted that long-distance ridership has been largely static since the 90s, not for lack of demand, but for lack of available coaches. Thus, to both free up superliners for western routes as well as cut down on the number of trains entering Moynihan, Amtrak made a semi-temporary end-to-end extension, combining the Chicago to DC Capital Limited with the New York to Miami via Tampa Silver Star. The resulting train pulls its name, the Floridian, from a historic set of trains which ran Chicago to Miami, however only over one night via Tennessee and Alabama, not the 2 nights of the Chicago to DC and then Miami route. The new route removes transfers and makes it simpler to visit Florida from the Midwest. However, that it is now the midpoint means that many departures from DC are now liable to having accrued a day's worth of delays, disproportionately disrupting reliability. Hopefully soon we'll get a return of the Cap and the Star, but with a true mid-southern Floridian. Oh my. A little bit of an adventurous note. We are pulling to a stop right now at an intersection somewhere in Deming, New Mexico. And there's an ambulance that backed right up to one of the passenger cars. Oh my. Oh, a railfan is capturing it. This is unexpected. Oh, and we're moving again. It looks like everything is okay. They boarded into a wheelchair, not a gurney. And there was somebody else there carrying luggage, so I hope everything's okay. Not exactly what I was expecting in recording on board an Amtrak train, but I guess you have to stay open for the unexpected. I hope everyone's okay. But alright, getting back to things. The next highest train numbers perfectly paired with the Floridian kneecap, my own former state supported route. I'm moving away from there, how sad. Trains number 42 and 43, the Pennsylvanian. This is one of a few state-supported regionals which get only one trip a day. It's been supplemented at various points over its history with additional trains across the corridor, but the Pennsy is now the sole weathered survivor. Famous for crossing its namesake states and former railroad's Middle Division, its scenic delights include the Pennsylvania Snack Belt and Dutch Country, the Susquehanna River and longest stone masonry bridge in the Western Hemisphere, the Appalachian Range's ridges and valleys along the Juniata River, an ascent up the Allegheny Plateau via the world-famous Horseshoe Curve, and a descent down the Allegheny Mountains along the Conemaugh River into the heart of Pittsburgh and a simply gorgeous station building. Dingy basement. The Pennsylvanian runs once a day between New York, Philadelphia, Harrisburg, Altoona, and Pittsburgh. Notably, it offers continuing service with the Capital Limited, though no through cars, so you'll have to detrain in Pittsburgh and wait a few hours until almost fucking midnight. Interestingly, if you want to go to catch a ride around the Horseshoe Curve, it is possible to do so with a same-day round trip. Starting eastbound from Johnstown at 9:05, you can ride around the curve and spend a day in Altoona at the Railroaders Memorial Museum and other attractions in town, then catch the return westbound at 17:16. Or you could do similarly at any number of other towns along the route right up until Harrisburg, whence there will only be an hour layover before the return trip. Moving back to the long-distance routes, trains 48, 49, 448, and 449 are the Lakeshore Limited. Similarly to the Empire Builder, this East Coast single overnighter splits in Albany, running from Chicago with sections to both New York and Boston. Named for the New York Central Railroad's famed 20th Century Limited, on whose route it runs, the Lakeshore has a slightly longer and less direct route, putting it at a near full day of travel end-to-end, assuming no delays. The Boston segment, trains 448 and 449, runs west through Worcester, Springfield, and Pittsfield. The New York segment runs along the Hudson through Poughkeepsie. They link up in Albany and run west through Syracuse, overnight through Rochester, Buffalo, Erie, and Cleveland, and breakfast through Toledo to Chicago. Return trips from Chicago proceed in the evening after approximately a 12-hour layover to allow enough time for the train set to be cleaned and absorb delays. Amtrak's only other thrice-weekly route, well, for now, are trains 50 and 51, the Cardinal. So named for the state bird of most of the states that it runs through, and a definite runt of the family, the Cardinal is a deeply looping and indirect itinerary between Chicago and New York, but via a southerly sweep through Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia. Though the scenic and wilderness amenities accessible from the train are truly incredible, and further still, though it is the only rail service to some very major cities, it is clear that the politicians responsible view this as a begrudging lifeline to forgotten communities, not as a cultural amenity or mechanism of economic stimulus or tourism. Notably, one going directly from Chicago to DC would have surely chosen the 10 hours faster Capital Limited, so the Cardinal is very much more a lifeline to those without a choice, or an oddity for those whom go out of their way, rather than a proper modern night train service. As it is, the Cardinal serves people traveling between Chicago, Lafayette, Indianapolis, Cincinnati, Charleston, West Virginia, White Sulphur Springs, Charlottesville, DC, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and New York. One notable feature of the Cardinal is that it travels through the base of the New River Gorge and has several stops in National Park Service-run trailhead towns, such as Thurmond, allowing you to take the train from a dense urban center straight to the wilderness and begin backpacking, much as in Europe. For those passing through, the scenery of the New River Gorge is rather stunning. Along with the Sunset Limited, there are plans to make it a daily train, but beyond that, not much. Additionally, the Hoosier State once operated on the Cardinal's off days between Indianapolis and Chicago, but Indiana was unhappy with how big and successful its economy was, and so they decided to trim it of good qualities and useful amenities. Trains 52 and 53, one of Amtrak's most supremely unique operations, is definitely its longest consist, the Auto Train. The third and final train to not immediately join Amtrak upon May Day 1971, and really the only startup passenger train company since the automobile era until the Rocky Mountaineer or Brightline, the Auto Train is a true night train, capable of cutting road tripping time down the East Coast in half. Originally having two routes, the second being from Louisville, the route to the Rust Belt didn't do as well as the I-95 corridor, which was transferred to Amtrak in 1983. The Auto Train has only two stations, Lorton, Virginia, just south of D.C., and Sanford, Florida, just north of Orlando, but comes with a very outdated and old-fashioned benefit. Among your checked luggage, you are allowed to include a car. After several hours of loading, the train whisks off down the coast for dinner in Virginia, overnight through the Carolinas, breakfast in Georgia, and arrival mid-morning in the Orlando outskirts. The train is an extremely popular concept, but the tight 17-hour runtime and multi-hour vehicle loading and unloadings means that delays in transit can sometimes cascade into the next day's departures, leading to occasional serialized on-time performance issues which are only recoverable by canceling a full day's departures, being nicknamed by rail fans as the Auto No Train. That being said, it is one of Amtrak's more popular routes, its highest revenue long-distance train, and at a typical consist of 8 sleepers, 4 coaches, 3 dining cars, 2 lounges, and up to 33 auto racks, all double-decked, it is over a kilometer long and the longest passenger train in the world by consist length. Back to a state-supported regional route, trains 54 through 57 represent the Vermonter. Though 4 numbers, it's still just one train with basically one route, the only difference being that trains 54 and 57 operate on the weekend and make a single additional stop in Metro Park, New Jersey, whereas trains 55 and 56 are their weekday equivalents without a stop in Metro Park. The Vermonter, like the Pennsylvanian, is another once-daily state-supported passenger train that starts on the Northeast Corridor, then heads out through gorgeous scenery to quaint towns. Originating in D.C. this time, it heads up to Philly, New York, and New Haven, but then peels off the corridor north to Springfield and continues up the Connecticut River to Greenfield, Brattleboro, and White River Junction near Dartmouth, before tacking to the interior of the state to Montpelier, ending at Essex Junction and St. Albans, just outside of Burlington. This is a beloved train for Northeast tourism, especially because of the multitude of cute, walkable towns the train serves the immediate confines of, so it's possible to not only live, but vacation car-free. Plans are currently underway to extend the Vermonter further north as a second train into Montreal. Unfortunately, due to Western Massachusetts' perplexing paucity of trains, it is not possible at current to take the Lakeshore Limited west to Springfield and transfer north there. The trains miss each other by literally only a few minutes. Instead, you have to take the Northeast Corridor southwest to New Haven and then transfer there. Trains 58 and 59 are a Midwestern long-distance train, the City of New Orleans. The Kono, as it's affectionately known, travels due north-south between Chicago and its namesake. Similar to the Capital Limited in running time, if a tad longer, it is almost a true night train, leaving Chicago in the evening and arriving in NOLA in the early afternoon. In part, though, due to its much more favorable territory, the Kono also serves as a train of regional importance, a little bit more to Middle Illinois, but mostly to everywhere south of Memphis, being the only major train or transportational backbone in the region and actually coming daily at moderately convenient times, morning southbound and evening northbound. In order to reach its particular route, the City of New Orleans is one of a very few trains exiting Chicago Union Station which must engage in a complicated switchback maneuver, backing out of the station for a mile or two, then reversing direction to access its route to the south, an artifact of the train's original station and operating railroad being a different one than Chicago Union Station in the pre-Amtrak days. This is obviously inefficient and time-consuming, so plans are slowly in the works to ameliorate this odd arrangement. Going back to state-supported daytime regional corridors, trains number 63 and 64 are the Maple Leaf. From here on down the timetable, we're going to get a lot of trains that run over routes that we've already talked about, occasionally with minor service deviations, and this will somewhat speed up the list. While it's useful to have fully de novo once-a-day routes like the Vermonter and Pennsylvanian, bringing trains deep into places where they would not be otherwise, when it comes to reliable, convenient train travel, any good transit aficionado will tell you that frequency is freedom. Multiple departures a day allow you not only flexibility in departure time, but also to take day trips rather than forcing you into overnight accommodations at your destination. This is what turns a single route into a corridor, where multiple overlapping trains work with each other to provide a higher level of service. Not just a higher person capacity, but a greater flexibility and convenience, compounding the corridor's utility. In many cases, the different route tiers intentionally work with each other, with the daily or multi-daily state corridor trains being scheduled around the long-distance trains, using the long-distance train as if it was just another frequency along the corridor. That is, if the long-distance train decides to show up on time. As pertains to the Maple Leaf, it mirrors the Lakeshore Limited's New York segment, going through New York, Albany, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, but then departs Buffalo Depew Station to also visit the much more centrally located Buffalo Exchange Station, then go north to Niagara Falls, New York, cross the border, and call at 4 GO transit stations ending at Toronto Union Station. Being one of only 3 cross-border Amtrak routes, the Maple Leaf is unique in that it is run jointly by Amtrak and Via Rail Canada, having a crew change at the border and being jointly listed on Via's timetables as trains 97 and 98. This is also not the last time we will come back to the New York-Albany-Buffalo route, the so-called Empire Corridor. Now we finally get to the meat of Amtrak, what most everybody thinks of when they hear of it, the Northeast Corridor's own Northeast Regional. Trains 65 to 67, 82 to 88, 93 to 96, 99, 111, and 121 to 196. That's 36 trains a day running during the week and 30 trains during the weekend. Traveling Boston, Providence, New Haven, New York, Trenton, Philadelphia, Wilmington, Baltimore, D.C., the Northeast Regional, abbreviated NER, is the base level of service on the Northeast Corridor, abbreviated NEC, although they're sometimes used interchangeably to refer to each other. It's a little more complicated than just D.C. to Boston, as trains vary in their service patterns. Some have limited stop service, only serving some stations at certain times of day, but there are also several branches to the Northeast Corridor. On the north end, some trains, supplemented by the Vermonter, Valley Flyer, and Hartford Shuttle, branch at New Haven and head directly to or from Springfield, Massachusetts, those being trains 125, 136, 140, 143, 146, and 148. On the south end, some trains extend beyond DC in what is technically separately branded the Virginia service, but in practice operates as one and the same with the Northeast Regional. Trains 82, 84, 87, 88, 93, 94, 95, 138, 141, 153, 157, and 158 all run to and from Norfolk. Trains 65, 67, 96, 99, 124, 125, 174, 186, and 194 run to and from Newport News, and trains 66, 145, 147, 151, 156, 171, and 176 run to and from Roanoke. And as aforementioned, on top of all of this, many of Amtrak's East Coast long-distance trains run along the Northeast Corridor as well from their origin at New York to points south. It obviously goes without saying that the Northeast Regional is Amtrak's single highest ridership service. Going all the way back down from the premier rail transportation artery in the Western Hemisphere to a once-a-day slow and problematic route are trains 68 and 69, the Adirondack. Named for the mountains next to which they travel, this similarly shares a portion of the Empire Corridor with the Lakeshore Limited and Maple Leaf up from New York to Albany, but then continues further north along the west shore of Lake Champlain to Saratoga Springs, Ticonderoga, Plattsburgh, and is our second train through the border continuing on to Montreal. The scenery is also quite beautiful, and similarly to the Vermonter, is an artery of bucolic vacationing, but the unique attraction is undeniably linking to the Francophone metropolis. Unfortunately, though, due to its runted status in the Northeast, being one of the last to return post-COVID and having a hostile host railroad situation north of the border, on-time performance is not at all doing well. As such, with its unreliability and lethargic pace, the Adirondack has the lowest ridership of any main sequence Amtrak train. While we've had state-supported routes, and of course the Northeast Corridor is a category unto itself, we are only now finally getting to a state-supported corridor. Trains 71 to 78 make up the Piedmont. Starting surprisingly late as far as passenger rail goes, only beginning in 1995, the Piedmont is a scrappy but wildly successful operation using second-hand equipment to provide 4 round trips a day between Raleigh, Durham, Greensboro, and Charlotte. I believe this is the first route we've discussed to use equipment not owned by Amtrak, rather NCDOT, leading to an extremely different, locally inspired, and a bit garish livery. While branding and advertising may be different, operations, ticketing, and crews are still fully within the Amtrak fold. Unfortunately, to my knowledge, the only food service on board is handled by vending machines. Very closely related are trains 79 and 80, the Carolinian. Also a state-supported route by NCDOT, the Carolinian runs the same route as the Piedmont once a day, acting as a 5th Piedmont frequency, but then continues up to Richmond, D.C., and New York, providing a link for North Carolina up the East Coast. The Carolinian is basically the Pennsylvanian of the South, having an almost identical consist. Our last few long-distance trains in the timetable are closely related enough that I'll discuss them together. Trains 89 and 90 are the Palmetto, 91 and 92 were the Silver Star, and trains 97 and 98 are the Silver Meteor, the latter two trains having been collectively referred to together as the Silver Service, prior to the Star's temporary subsuming into the cap as the Floridian. These 3 trains run from New York to Miami, but by one of the more complex service patterns yet. Running, of course, on the Northeast Corridor, New York, Philly, DC, and then to Richmond, they take different routes through the Carolinas. The Floridian Nee Silver Star goes through Raleigh, but unlike the Piedmont and Carolinian, takes a more inland route through Southern Pines and Columbia. The Silver Meteor, on the other hand, is more coastal, going through Fayetteville and Charleston. Both rejoin in Savannah and head south to Florida. The Palmetto, meanwhile, takes the Meteor's coastal route, but terminates in Savannah. Down in Florida, another deviation occurs. Both the Meteor and Floridian Nee Star use Amtrak's more inland route from Jacksonville to DeLand, Winter Park, Orlando, Kissimmee, Winter Haven, and then the Miami-Dade Impending Climate Refugee Camp Internment Area. But the Star once again diverts westward, this time to Tampa, and returns over the exact same track. Uniquely, this makes it the only train to stop at a single station 4 times in a regular run, Lakeland, Florida, necessitating 2 separate station codes, LAK for points north and LKL for points south. Despite all of these trains taking similar routes, their timing creates very different service patterns and therefore very different trains. For one, the Palmetto is a fully daytime train, no sleepers, leaving New York just after 0600 and arriving in Savannah just at 2130, acting primarily as a day complement for the intermediate stretch hit by the overnighters. The Silver Service, by comparison, are both overnighters with sleeping and dining accommodations. The Silver Star was the first to depart New York at 1100, reaching Richmond by 1720 and Raleigh by 2110, then sleeping through Savannah and waking up in Jacksonville at 0730 the next day. It hits Orlando at 1047, Kissimmee at 1111, and Tampa at 1300, arriving in Miami by 1835. In contrast, the Silver Meteor is shifted by a few hours, departing New York in the afternoon at 1430 and reaching Richmond by 2140. Diverging from the Star at Rocky Mount, it sleeps its way through the Carolinas. That the Meteor serves Savannah at 0640, Charleston at 0450, and Rocky Mount at midnight explains why the Palmetto exists as a daytime counterpart. Anyway, the Meteor calls at Jacksonville at 0950, Orlando at 1300, and arrives Miami at 1900. Interestingly, because the Star's diversion to Tampa, the 2 trains are separated by 4 or so hours throughout the day, but south of Winter Haven are much closer together, arriving Miami within 25 minutes of each other. The next morning, the return trips are inverted. The Meteor departs Miami first at 8:10, followed by the Star at 11:40. The Meteor largely keeps its daytime-nighttime divisions, but the Star is shifted a bit by its late departure and diversion to Tampa, reaching Jacksonville by 2300. A reminder, though, that the Silver Star is temporarily no more, and the Floridian replaces it only south of DC, and with the schedule shifted by about a few hours. The next trains on the timetable are 230 to 288, the Empire Service. These trains run along the Empire Corridor, Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Albany, New York City, and are heavily interlined with the Lakeshore Limited, Maple Leaf, Adirondack, Ethan Allen Express, and, even Metro North Railroad, with Amtrak trains covering this route 11 times a day. However, looking at the schedule reveals an interesting quirk. Only 2 Empire Service trains cover the whole route to Buffalo, along with the Lakeshore Limited and Maple Leaf to make 4 round trips. Minding that the Adirondack and Ethan Allen Express peel off near Schenectady, that leaves 5 of the Empire Service trains, almost half of the whole corridor's volume, running only between New York and Albany. In fact, in many ways, these are de facto commuter trains, arriving at Manhattan at 0745, 0921, and 1045, and departing Manhattan 1645, 1747, and 1846. This monopolarity is further evidenced by Buffalo getting eastbound service only before 1230 and westbound service only after 1500. On the subject of New York to Albany service are trains 290 and 291, the Ethan Allen Express. In many ways similar to the Vermonter, the EAE travels once a day from New York up the Hudson like many an Empire service to Albany, then parts ways at Schenectady like the Adirondack, but goes up the southwestern side of Vermont via many cute small towns. For much of its existence, it ended in Rutland, but Vermont has recently been bullish on passenger rail expansion, and the EAE has been extended via a backing maneuver northwest to Burlington. Although I believe there have been some problems with reliability due to the newness of the mileage, it returns passenger service right to downtown Burlington for the first time in decades, and given that the Vermonter also stops in Essex Junction, acts as an effective second daily frequency from Burlington to New York. The EAE is operated with only a single train set, departing Burlington in the morning and returning late at night. The next group of trains is one of the largest, most modern, most successful, and most invested in Amtrak networks outside of the Northeast Corridor, the Illinois service. Technically making up 3.5 separate routes, almost all are interlined with long-distance trains for corridors ranging from 6 to 10 trains a day. The first up is the Lincoln service, trains 300 to 302, 304 to 307, and 318 and 319, the Lincoln service. These run Chicago, Joliet, Bloomington Normal, Springfield, St. Louis, 4 round trips a day with a 5th provided by the Texas Eagle, incredible frequencies compared to most other places in this shithole country. Illinois has invested a ton in this route specifically, probably in no small reason because it runs through the state capital, and now they have end-to-end travel times of even the slowest all-stops train taking under 5 hours, which is just as long as it takes to drive. Very closely related, but technically not part of the Illinois service, is the Missouri River Runner, trains 311, 316, 318, and 319. If you're listening closely, you'll recognize that the latter two numbers are the exact same as the Lincoln service, as one Lincoln service round trip a day from Chicago carries on past St. Louis via Washington, Jefferson City, and Lee's Summit to Kansas City. Trains 311 and 316 are simply a single train set making a short turn, departing St. Louis for Casey in the morning, and returning in the evening respectively to balance out departures on the clock of the, Lincoln Runner. Back to the Illinois service proper, 2 more routes radiate out into the state from Chicago, hopefully soon to be a third as plans are in the works for a train to Peoria. Northwest of the Lincoln service are trains 380 to 383, the paired Illinois Zephyr and Carl Sandburg. These 2 trains head westerly out of Chicago to Naperville, Mendota, and Galesburg, and are local versions of both the Southwest Chief and the California Zephyr, calling at 6 stations between Chicago and Galesburg to the long distances 2 or 3. After Galesburg, the Carl Zephyr and Illinois Sandburg turn south from the shared line for just 2 more stops, Macomb and Quincy. The Illinois Zephyr is the longest continuously operated state-sponsored passenger train, dating from the very creation of Amtrak itself, and is named primarily for the fact that it's a local of the California Zephyr and is related to the ton of other Zephyr-branded trains that ran along the route. The Carl Sandburg was added as a second frequency to the IZ in 2006 and named for the Pulitzer Prize-winning poet born in Galesburg. The last of the Illinois service, east of the Lincoln service, are the Illini and Saluki, trains 390 to 393, running due south Chicago, Kankakee, Champaign-Urbana, Mattoon, Centralia, Carbondale. With the collapsing populations of eastern and southern Illinois, this corridor has the fewest trains, only the 2 state-supported round trips and a 3rd long-distance express supplemented by the city of New Orleans. Departure times are also less than convenient or evenly spaced, I'm sure much to the consternation of students and faculty at UIUC. This particular route is also notable for its labored back-in maneuver to get out of Chicago Union Station, shared with the Kono. Just a side note for a moment. In reading so many of these timetables for the Illinois service, it's funny how I've noticed almost every single train set has a turnaround time of just a hair under 3 hours. Anyway, we're done with the Illinois service, but we're not leaving Chicago yet, as there are 2 more groups of state-supported corridors. First, departing north out of Chicago Union Station to Milwaukee are trains 329 to 343, the Hiawatha, sponsored by Wisconsin. These are 6 round trips evenly spaced throughout the day, but the early and afternoon trains are somewhat scheduled to also operate as commuter trains. The Hiawatha is the 3rd shortest Amtrak route, behind the Winter Park Express and the Hartford Shuttle, and calls only at 5 stations: Chicago, Glenview, Sturtevant, Milwaukee Airport, and Milwaukee Intermodal. It should be noted that trains 333 and 340 were recently extended to St. Paul, Minnesota as the Borealis, being renumbered as 1 333 and 1 340. Lastly of the Midwestern regionals is the Michigan service. Made up of 3 routes and 5 trains, 350 to 355 are the Wolverine, 364 and 365 are the Blue Water, and 370 and 371 are the Père Marquette. The Wolverine is the premier route, which runs thrice daily Chicago, Dowagiac, Kalamazoo, Battle Creek, Ann Arbor, Dearborn, Detroit, Pontiac, connecting directly with the Q-Line streetcar in downtown Detroit. The Blue Water runs once daily, following the Wolverine to Battle Creek, then splitting to arc over southeastern Michigan by way of Lansing, Durand, Flint, and Port Huron. The Père Marquette runs simply once a day, 5 stops: Chicago, Benton Harbor, Bangor, not that Bangor, Holland, not that Holland, and Grand Rapids. It's worth noting that these trains run over the only other Amtrak-owned passenger rail corridor in the country besides the NEC. The Michigan line is owned by Amtrak from Porter to Kalamazoo, and the rest to Dearborn is owned by MDOT, allowing for 232 miles of 110-mile-per-hour capable track, making it one of the U.S.'s few designated high-speed rail lines. Michigan is commendable for the investment that is put into passenger rail, but there are some glaring gaps. Not only are 2 of the 3 routes only 1 frequency daily, there's also a lack of a cross-state line connecting Detroit to Lansing and beyond. There are plans by local residents to create such a line called the A2TC, or Ann Arbor to Traverse City line, which would not only solve this, but also bring service to the scenic and remote areas upstate. Additionally, plans are slowly working to reconnect Detroit with Toledo, finally allowing eastbound travel again without transferring in Chicago. Nonetheless, with what trains Michigan already has, over 75% of Michiganders live within 20 miles of a train station. Trains 400, 461, 471, 478, 488, and 490's 4, 5, and 9 are the Valley Flyer, treading track that is already familiar to us. A more recent addition to supplement Vermonter's north-south service in central Massachusetts and Connecticut, 2 trains a day shuttle between Greenfield and Springfield, Massachusetts, and 1 continues on to New Haven. Generally, they're all interlined and coordinated for transfers to the Northeast Regional or Metro North trains, and are generally split between the Vermonter, one before and one after. Schedules are wildly different on the weekends compared to the weekdays, which is why there are 8 numbers for 2 round-trip trains. Very closely related to the Valley Flyer is the Hartford Shuttle, trains 405 to 432 and 450 to 497. While a very few Northeast regionals run non-stop from New York to Hartford and Springfield via a power change from electric to diesel at New Haven, most connections are made by a transfer to a tiny 2-car shuttle train made up of a P-42 Genesis, an Amfleet, and an old Metroliner converted into a cab car, which usually stays empty. These trains are generally denoted by a 400 number change. If you're connecting from train 86, your Hartford Shuttle will be 486. If you're connecting from train 177, your Hartford Shuttle is 477, and so on. A typical day sees 7 to 9 round trips, in addition to the CT Rail local service operated by the state, which adds another 6 to 13. Even though Connecticut is a horrible suburban place, its regional rail service per area is almost unmatched on this side of the Atlantic, and should be commended. If the 200s are New York, the 300s are the Midwest, and the 400s are Connecticut, the 500s are the West Coast. One of Amtrak's single busiest rail corridors is Amtrak Cascades, trains 500 to 519. A caveat here that with the decommissioning of the Talgo 6s and the sudden withdrawal of the Horizon coaches nationwide for faster-than-expected corrosion, Cascades has been on the short end of a ton of unfortunate sticks of late, and its schedule predictability has taken a walloping. Furthermore, upon the introduction of the new Aero train sets next year, Cascades will likely see even further revisions, if not additions, so this may still be very up in the air yet. That being said, under Cascade's current timetables, 6 round trips a day operate Seattle, Tacoma, Olympia, Centralia, Kelso, Vancouver, Waugh, and Portland, with service spanning approximately 0700 to 2300 and trains departing approximately every 2 to 3 hours. That used to be much busier, but, well, you know, Point Defiance bypass and all that. A further 7th round trip is provided by the Coast Starlight coming up from California. End-to-end run times are under 3.5 hours, making it time competitive with driving, and faster when there's traffic. Additionally, 2 trains a day go further north, Seattle, Everett, Mount Vernon, Bellingham, Vancouver, BC, and further south, Portland, Salem, Albany, Eugene. The first of these outbound trains each day originates their nearest major city, Seattle or Portland, whereas the second is a corridor train that first traverses the length of the shared core between Seattle and Portland, then continuing on to complete the distal branches. The inbound trains from Eugene and Vancouver, BC are the inverse, with the first inbound train each day reaching Portland or Seattle respectively, then traversing the common corridor to Seattle or Portland respectively, whereas the afternoon branch trains terminate at the edges of the corridor. It having once been my home territory, I of course have hordes of opinions on this particular route, and it has been frustrating to see this nonetheless incredible corridor still somehow never live up to its explosive potential. Even still, Amtrak Cascades is the 3rd highest ridership of any non-Northeast Amtrak train and the 7th highest overall, or just about 1 million passengers yearly, translating to about 1 in 10 Cascadians, showing quite definitively that passenger rail is always viable no matter where, so long as you give it appropriate service levels. Moving down the Pacific Coast, split between the 500s and 700s are the Caltrans trains, starting with 520 to 553 and 720 to 751, the Capital Corridor. The CC is remarkably short, under 200 miles and almost entirely within the Bay Area, but achieves the same ridership as Cascades, yet at only 1/3 the length. Running mostly Sacramento, Davis, Martinez, Oakland, and with both bus and BART connections across the Bay to San Francisco, 2/3 of the trains continue south to Fremont and San Jose, and 1 train a day goes the other way past Sacramento to Roseville and Auburn. These are just as much commuter trains as they are regional trains, with approximately hourly departures from 0500 to 1000 every other hour until 1400 and hourly again to 2000, with an extra departure westbound at 0645-ish and eastbound at 1645-ish for extra peak capacity. 500 series trains offer 14 weekday round trips, plus each the Coast Starlight and California Zephyr over the same territory, whereas 700 series trains are 11 weekend round trips. But the single highest non-Northeast ridership route, and the 3rd busiest overall behind only the Northeast Regional and Acela, however, is at the other end of California, trains 562 to 595 and 761 to 794, the Pacific Surfliner. Unlike Cascades, which is a bipolar corridor running between Seattle and Portland, with some trains extending north to Vancouver and south to Eugene, the Surfliner is by extrapolation monopolar. A dozen trains a day run San Diego, Oceanside, Irvine, Santa Ana, Anaheim, Los Angeles. 5 continue north, Burbank, Simi Valley, Oxnard, Ventura, Santa Barbara, Goleta, and 2 of those continue further north, Lompoc, Grover Beach, San Luis Obispo, supplemented with a Coast Starlight round trip. The 500 series trains run San Diego to LA, and the 700 series trains run San Diego to either Santa Barbara or San Luis Obispo. The trains run in push-pull configuration, but switch direction backing into and out of Los Angeles Union Station. Like a lot of other state-supported corridors, the Surfliner has a branding distinct from other Amtrak services, possibly the simplest and most iconic, a brilliant royal blue over a shiny silver on double-decker all-coach superliners. Excluding a few exceptions, trains run hourly throughout the day. The name for the route derives from a long stretch of ocean cliffside and beachfront running on the southern portion of the route, and while scenic, it's unfortunately proven a liability, as extensive erosion has destabilized the tracks and forced several multi-month service cancellations in recent years. Back to familiar territory, trains 600 to 674 are the Keystone service. The Keystone is uncommonly unique, and so good it barely deserves to be in the state that it's in. It, too, runs on the Northeast Corridor, but reverses out of Philly 30th Street Station and continues its electrified higher-speed territory through Paoli, Lancaster, Downingtown, and clear on to the banks of the Susquehanna at Harrisburg. On the Northeast Corridor, it sometimes even runs Super Express, stopping only at Trenton and Newark between Philly and New York. It's a very short train, only a touch over 100 miles and under 2 hours from Philly to Harrisburg, and as such lacks any onboard meal service. Despite being an Amtrak train, it really functions as a commuter train for southeastern and south-central Pennsylvania, with arrivals in Harrisburg at 7, 8, and 9:15, and departures 16:30, 17:40, and 18:40. But overall, including the Pennsylvanian, it represents a whopping 14 trains a day, almost hourly between Harrisburg, Lancaster, Philly, and New York. Pennsylvania has a ton wrong with it due to its centuries of rural overreach, but the Keystone is not one of those downsides. Getting very close to the end of the timetable are trains 680 to 699, plus 1689, the Downeaster. Another somewhat short train, only 145 miles and under 3.5 hours, and only starting service in 2001, the Downeaster has seen significant success, steadily growing in round trips, station number, route length, and speed over the intervening 2 decades. Interestingly, the train is the only one to be disconnected from the entire Amtrak network. Every other Amtrak train calls at Boston South Station, but the Downeaster calls at Boston North Station, necessitating one to make one's own transfer across downtown Boston via at least 2 subway lines. The Downeaster currently has 5 round trips a day, going through Haverhill, Mass., Exeter, Durham, and Dover, New Hampshire, and Wells, Saco, Portland, Freeport, and Brunswick, Maine, with several extensions to Bangor, Lewistown, and Rockland under consideration. Uniquely, the Downeaster frequently adjusts its published schedules, with train 1689 being reserved for an event schedule of train 689, departing Boston at 23:30 on nights with a Red Sox home game or events or concerts at TD Garden, the stadium which sits atop Boston North Station. One final round in California, the San Joaquins, trains 701 to 719. Much less busy than its other pair, the San Joaquins is the runt of California's rail investment. Unfortunately, despite the Coast Starlight traveling direct from Los Angeles to Oakland, it is a night train with a once-daily departure, and its coastal route is quite slow. The San Joaquins, on the other hand, doesn't actually go to LA, stopping almost 200 kilometers short in Bakersfield, requiring onward connection by a 3-hour bus. Why the train can't close the last few dozen miles is beyond me. Even so, the time of bus plus wait plus train up the Central Valley is somehow actually shorter than just taking the Starlight, and incredibly, over half of all passengers on the San Joaquins connect to the train by Amtrak Thruway bus. At least to me, a transit commissioner and advocate, that screams of unmet demand, potential, and service level. While the San Joaquins technically has 2 northern branches, the route from Stockton to Sacramento sees only 1 train a day, although there are plans to marginally improve that. The 5 other trains on the schedule all travel every 2 to 4 hours: Bakerfield, Fresno, Merced, Modesto, Antioch, Oakland. The last regular state-supported service on the timetable is the Heartland Flyer, trains 821 and 822. This train is a simple one, but from what I hear, beloved. The only Amtrak service in Oklahoma runs daily from OKC in Norman south to Fort Worth, Texas in the morning and back in the evening, connecting with the Texas Eagle. Trains 21 and 22 to the Heartland Flyers 821 and 822. Jointly funded by Texas and Oklahoma, it makes 7 stops in 4 hours over 200 miles. Future plans include extending it to Newton and Wichita to connect with the Southwest Chief, as well as increasing frequency. Creatively, since its inception, the train was designed to fuel the Red River rivalry football game between the OU Sooners and the UT Austin Longhorns, held every year at the neutral territory of the Texas State Fair. For this, the Heartland Flyer becomes the Big Game Train, doubling its coaches and adding a sightseer lounge car, and running along Trinity Railway Express tracks from Fort Worth to Dallas, connecting with the light rail to the Texas State Fairgrounds. We've crossed into the thousands and have just 3 trains to go. This high up on the schedule, the next 2 trains run only part of the year. To the California Zephyrs 5 and 6, 1105 and 1106 are the Winter Park Express, Amtrak's shortest train at just 62 miles and just 3 stops. Denver Union Station, the Winter Park Resort, and Fraser, Colorado. This is the continuation of the famous Rio Grande Ski Train, departing Denver every morning during the winter at 0700 and returning at 1900. While the California Zephyr takes much the same route at much the same time, Denver's in the dead middle of the run, so it unfortunately sometimes accrues major delays inconvenient to skiers. Additionally, Colorado has a lot of skiers, and the prolonged boarding and detraining times would negatively affect any regular Amtrak customers. The train runs only 3 months out of the year, from Thursday to Monday, January to March. The final seasonal train, only started in 2022, are trains 1235, 1237, and 1246, the Berkshire Flyer. For a long time, Western Mass has been clamoring for train service better than the once-a-day Late for Sure Limited, as Massachusetts, despite being solidly an east-west state, has only one east-west train, compared to literally dozens of north-south ones. So, because we live in the US of America, did they make an east-west train? No, they access Pittsfield with another north-south one, this time effectively taking an Empire service and extending it backwards 1 station from Albany to Pittsfield. Now Pittsfield gets 1 train each way, only Sundays and Fridays, June to September. Sigh. The train to Pittsfield arrives at 20:39 on Friday and departs Sunday at 15:30. Strangely, and this is the only Amtrak train on the entire timetable I've been unable to figure out, it also appears that there is another Massachusetts-bound train Sunday afternoon, arriving a mere 20 minutes before the departure of the southbound. 2 northbounds and 1 southbound doesn't add up, as, were this unchecked, the entirety of the Empire service fleet would eventually end up in Pittsfield without escape. What I imagine happens is that the Friday evening train deadheads to Albany for layover without revenue passengers, but the Sunday outbound train is just staging the train for the Sunday inbound maneuver, albeit with an incredibly quick turnaround time. Either way, with the daily Lakeshore Limited, passengers aren't exactly stranded and can easily transfer out in Albany to a regular Empire service corridor. Still, it's a needlessly inflexible and inconvenient arrangement, and that makes me more likely to visit Greenfield on the Valley Flyer. There are just 2 more trains in the Amtrak timetables by increasing train number, but 1333 and 1340, the Borealis, have already been covered as they are timetable extensions of the Hiawatha, hence their bonus 1000 number. That leaves only trains 2100 to 2290, America's only true high-speed rail, the Acela. To properly understand the Acela, you have to know the history of the Northeast Corridor itself. Briefly recapping from previous episodes, what we understand today is the DC to Boston route was originally owned and operated by 2 separate railroad companies, the Pennsylvania Railroad from DC to New York, and the New Haven from New York to Boston. The Pennsy was the larger railroad that specialized in long-distance trains from the East Coast throughout the Midwest, so its entire main line from DC to New York was electrified and all trains changed power at Harrisburg. The New Haven, by comparison, was smaller, more metropolitan, and, thus focusing on more short-haul regional trips, only had electrification as far as New Haven. That was the situation that Amtrak inherited, and many a railfan and modeler have undergone a millennium amnesia, I imagine due to an unrealistic assessment of high-speed rail as being a novelty in this country, or of high-speed rail train set models as being unfairly childish, that for the majority of its existence, trains from DC to Boston ran electric to New Haven, then changed to diesel service for the final leg to Boston. So, then, what actually happened? How did we go from that to what technically has actually been America's only high-speed rail for, the past 25 years, a quarter of a century, and the majority of my life? Well, it was the 1960s. Japan had just inaugurated the world's first true high-speed rail, the Shinkansen, and the US had followed closely behind with the Penn Central Metroliners, which helped to reinvigorate rail travel along the line as modern and sexy. In fact, the Metroliners did themselves actually briefly qualify as true high-speed rail, reaching a speed of 150 miles an hour during one special run, which is all the more notable because their brakes only worked up to 140 miles an hour, so they had to find a long enough stretch of track to coast back down to the designed operational parameters once the speed record had been reached. With both the Pennsy and New Haven falling to Penn Central and the ensuing financial debacle, momentum unfortunately was lost. But with the 1971 formation of Amtrak providing a unified governmental control of the corridor, the Federal Railroad Administration took interest in a contiguous route at the northeast. Slowly but surely, work started to take place. In 1990s 2 and 3, a Swedish X2000 and German ICE-1 high-speed train sets were rented and toured around the country, first under the existing wire and then by diesel chaperones to the rest of the U.S. rail system. Using test data from the European train sets, Amtrak set bids for 150-mile-an-hour equipment and chose a consortium of Bombardier and Alstom in 1996 of a French-style duplex system with 2 powered locomotives on either end and 6 cars. The resulting train sets are completely unique in the world, an unholy marriage between European engineering and styling and Byzantine FRA crashworthiness standards. Alstom handled the locomotives based on the French TGV design, using 4,600 kilowatt power cars at either end designed to operate on 12, 12.5, or 25 kilovolts and 25 or 60 hertz overhead power, a Frankenstein of the inherited systems from different railroads' electrification standards. Notably, though, many of the control systems and truck designs came directly from the TGV via the Alstom archives. Bombardier handled the coaches. Then a powerhouse of passenger equipment, which has since faltered, was subsumed by and managed to bequeath poor Alstom its growing reputation for equipment delivery issues. Bombardier designed the passenger cars to tilt for extra speed gains, something not found on the TGV. Due to the excess weight from the tilting mechanisms and the FRA crashworthiness standards, the power-to-weight ratio of the Acellas was almost a third less than the TGV, and the French and Canadian crews sent to test the train sets referred to it as the pig. Notably, both for crashworthiness and for weight savings, this meant that the Acellas were built as semi-permanently married train sets without trapdoors, allowing them to service only high-level platforms. I personally think this was for the best. After 4 years of work, 20 train sets were ready, but so was the route. Amtrak massively improved the existing trackage, preeminently by electrifying the track from New Haven to Boston, as well as eliminating grade crossings, improving track geometry, and building express service amenities. The name was announced in 1999, a portmanteau of accelerated excellence. By 2000, the first train set went to the Transportation Technology Center in Pueblo, Colorado for testing. The inaugural VIP run from Boston occurred on November 16, 2000, and revenue service began on December 11th. Less than 5 years later, Amtrak's share of New York to Boston traffic went from 18% to over 40% and has now surpassed 50%. Airline companies have even canceled flights between Boston, New York, and DC. More Acellas were added in 2005, but even they couldn't meet the demand. To this day, the Acela is Amtrak's second most popular service. With the success of Acela, the previous first-class Metroliner service was phased out, Metroliner cars surviving to this day as cab cars for some northeastern routes. The Acela Express was notable not just for that it was high-speed rail, but because it helped Amtrak to achieve brand unity. Having inherited a number of disparately named trains from previous host railroads, creating a mishmash of different trains with different names up and down the northeast corridor, the Acellas, and also the electrification of the route to Boston, precipitated a reorganization and simplification of the whole corridor. Regular trains making all or many stops became the Northeast Regional, with regular and business class accommodations, plus or minus a hiccup to the Acela Regional and Acela Commuter, briefly confusing riders. The limited stop trains became the Acela Express, with only business and first class tickets. By 2019, the Acela Express simply became the Acela. Each married train set consists of 2 power cars, 4 2x2 business class cars, a cafe car, and a 2x1 first class car, and seating arrangements are chosen by advanced reservation. Astonishingly, onboard Wi-Fi was equipped all the way the fuck back in 2004. From my own experience, first class offers at-seat highest quality service and meals that, at the very least, meet, if not slightly exceed, the finest Europe has to offer. The first-class treatment also extends to train operations itself. In the event of delays, Acellas are dispatched to hopscotch other corridor trains, being given true express treatment. The Acela train sets are rated up to 165 miles an hour, and the max speed of the NEC is 160. However, that max speed exists for only 4 segments, amassing to only about 40 miles of the 450-mile route. The rest of the time, the Acellas achieve their higher speed through a combination of 4.2 degrees of active tilting on certain segments of the line, which allows a dozen or so mile-per-hour cheat over non-tilting trains, and super express status, maintaining higher top speeds for longer than trains needing to slow down for additional stops. The average speed of the entire route, including stops, is over 70 miles per hour. Unfortunately, though, the majority of the speed restrictions along the route are infrastructural. Over 200 bridges on the NEC are beyond their designed lifespan, and catenary south of Delaware is almost 100 years old and doesn't include constant tensioning technology. Nonetheless, with upgrades funded by the Obama administration but only recently being completed, 150 mile-per-hour revenue service began in New Jersey in 2022, a full 25 miles per hour faster than the Metroliners ever achieved in regular service. Unfortunately, with time and extremely heavy use from their popularity, the Acellas were starting to show their age. Train sets were refurbished in 2009 and again in 2018, keeping them as premium as possible. However, with a quarter century of nearly 1,000 miles a day fast approaching, along with often sold-out demand, it became clear the next generation of Acellas were needed. In 2016, then VP Amtrak Joe announced plans to acquire 28 new train sets from Alstom of the Avelia Liberty model, later termed the next-gen Acellas, to replace the original 20 train sets. The Avelias were to be longer, have 27% more seats, and 9 articulated cars, with options for 3 more for later expansion. Furthermore, they are built for initial 160 mph service and up to 186 mph travel with planned route upgrades. While the Avelias were intended to be put into service in 2021, and testing on the NEC began in 2020, similar problems arose as before, crashing existing European equipment headlong with even newer, stricter FRA crashworthiness standards, and centenarily outdated infrastructure. What would have worked well on a dedicated new-build high-speed line, or even an old line funded well enough to keep up with the times, ended up not playing very nice with the quirks of the NEC. Years were spent modifying the equipment as defects were identified, and years more on modifying the train's computer systems to cope with the territory. But finally, on August 28th, 2025, the first 5 train sets went into service. 3 days after I moved away from the East Coast. With the caveat that the continued delivery of the new Acellas will rapidly destabilize and hopefully improve the schedule, the timetable valid to 2025-08-22 stood thusly. 10 round trips a day provide service approximately every 2 hours through New York, with hourly clusters amid the morning and evening rushes. 7 of the 10 trips run the full length of the route from Boston to DC, and the other 3 run between only New York and DC. The typical train set makes the full-length trip twice, racking up over 900 miles a day in service, with turnaround times of about 2 hours. Station stops of Boston, Boston Back Bay, Route 128, Providence, New Haven, Stamford, New York, Philadelphia, Wilmington, Baltimore, and Washington are served by all trains, while Newark, Metro Park, and BWI Airport are served by 8, 4, and 4 Acellas a day, respectively. Presently, and since their inauguration, the Acela Express has been the fastest regularly scheduled service in the Western Hemisphere, and even with private ventures and improving state corridors offering decent competition, it is still the fastest train in operation in all of North and South America. Acela is the second most popular Amtrak route. Together with the Northeast Regional, it carries over 12 million passengers a year, and alone is responsible for over 20% of Amtrak's total revenue. Just between New York and DC, since the start of service in 2000, Acela has more than doubled the ratio of train-to-air travelers, capturing over 80% of all New York to DC traffic. Acela is, and always has been, true high-speed rail. This has been episode 13 of the Proto-Future podcast, How to Ride Amtrak, Part 1, the entire timetable. I would like to take a moment to thank Nathaniel Nerode and all others at the Rail Passengers Association for their invaluable work writing code to compile timetables for Amtrak trains freely available to the public based on general transit feed specification data. I relied heavily on these timetables to make this episode, and it is just one of many services funded by the Rail Passengers Association. If you, in any way, support rail advocacy, I heartily recommend donating to the RPA, as have I since 2018, being an Advocate Gold level member since 2020. Not because I'm showing off or even personally affluent, but because I really, really like trains and am willing to forego such unnecessary luxuries as food and shelter in order to secure a better future for choo-choos. Among other things, membership at any level to the Rail Passengers Association gets you a 10% discount off of any Amtrak-based ticket, so as long as you spend $100 or so on Amtrak tickets a year, the membership already pays for itself. But even if you don't, isn't it worth it to further advance the cause of more mecha choo-choos combating the climate apocalypse bicephalic monster with a head each named Las Vegas and Columbus? I'd think so, don't you? The theme music is Spark of Life by Benjamin Lazarus through Tribe of Noise. I would like to thank my extremely generous and patient patrons Pedro Reyes, Ron Kleiss, Bill Ford, Linda Eskin, and Roger Coleman. This content is CAN-credentialed. You can report instances of harassment, abuse, or other harm to their hotline at 617-249-4255 or on their website at creatoraccountabilitynetwork.org. If you would like to know more, you can visit the website at www.bgtmrring.org. That's Bravo Golf Tango, Michael Romeo Romeo, Indigo November Golf, Oscar Romeo Golf, to listen to the Manifesto and Prologue series, watch the Modern Modeling Clinic anthology, and read the free-to-access Patreon production blog. And please consider donating on a per-episode basis to help defer hosting and equipment costs and support what I do. This podcast was written, recorded, and produced on the ancestral lands of the Susquehannock, Osage, Monongahela, Shawnee, Massawomack, Lenni Lenape, Munsee Lenape, Shaktikok, Mohican, Haudenosaunee, Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca, Wenronan, Erie, Mississauga, Kaskaskia, Wivandut, Miamia, Peoria, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Fox, Oceti-Sakowin, Ho-Chunk, Sauk, Owapa, Caddo, Wichita, Tawakoni, Humanos, Comanche, Waco, Tonkawa, Kauhulitakan, Lipan Apache, Sana, Mascogo, Mescalero Apache, Sumas, Mansos, Piro, Tiwa, Chihuahua Apache, Pescardo, Western Apache, Oodham Hewitt, Hohokam, Sabipuri, Tohono Oodham, Upper Pima, Maricopa, Yavapai Apache, Kokapa, Haiched Oodham, Quatsayan, Kumiayas, Kauhlia, Luiseño, Serrano, Tongva, Juaneño, Tataviam Chumash, Fernandeño, Ventureño Chumash, Barbareño Chumash, Iniseño, Amul, Selinian, Obispeño, Eselin, Amamutsun, Shalon, Rumsen, Olone, Awaswas, Muekma, Tamian Nation, Confederated Villages of Lycian, Miwok, Karkin, Patwin, Nisian, Cayusi, Umatilla, Walla Walla, Konko, Mechupta, Yana, Nomlakai, Northern Wintu, Daupom Wintu, El Pon Wintu, Kilbal Wintu, Winnimem Wintu, Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, Achumawi, Modoc, Pit River, Waimak, Okwanuchu, Shasta, Nomtipom Wintu, Nomsos Wintu, Molala, Cow Creek Umpqua, Tekelma, Klamath, Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, Kalapuya, Yonkala, Winnefeli, Chaffin, San Kupi, Santiam, Ahanchoyuk, Clackamas, Cowlitz, Multnuma, Klickitat, Chehalis, Nisqually, Squaxin, Puyallup, Muckleshoot, Duwamish, Stillaguamish, Squamish, Snoqualmie, and Tulalip tribes. I would like to thank them for their historical stewardship of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, Arkansas, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Oregon, and Washington. And I will also never ever write and record an episode while traveling ever again. Thank you very much for listening. Keep riding trains, keep punching Nazis, and keep building a better future.